You will be paid whether you speak or not, the Duke of Harkstone said. He set 2 guineas on the table between them, one and then the other, and did not push them across. It was 6 in the morning on the 29th of September, and the candles were still doing the work of the day, because the shutters on that side of the house had not been opened in 5 years, and the man who knew which of them stuck had died in the spring. Susanna Cardew looked at the coins, and then at him. He was a tall man, gone thin in the face, and he stood as though standing were a thing he had been told to do, and had not been told when to stop. "That is a great deal of money for talk," she said. "It is a great deal of talk." "Until when?" "Midnight," he said. "The engagement is for the day. At midnight the chaise takes you back to the town, and the thing is done, and nobody is under any obligation to anybody. And in between? You sit at my right hand in that hall, and you speak to me, and if I find I cannot speak back, you go on speaking to whoever is nearest, as though the pause were nothing." He said it flatly, the way a man gives directions to a place he does not intend to go himself. "You will not be asked to lie about anything of consequence." "Then let me say the one condition I have, before the money is mine, and I have lost the nerve." She folded her hands. "I will not be introduced as anything but what I am. Not a cousin, not a friend of the family. If a man at that table asks me who I am, I shall tell him. And you had better decide now whether you can bear it." The candle nearest the window guttered and put a long shake of light across the 2 coins, and the Duke of Harkstone said nothing at all for the space of 5 heartbeats. The evening before, in the town, in a front parlour that smelled of coal and other people's letters, Mistress Prideaux had told her what the day was worth, and what it was not. 2 guineas, she said. "The office takes 1. Do not make a face at me. I have made that face myself, and it never once altered an account book." "I have not made a face." "You are making it now, with your shoulders." Mistress Prideaux was a handsome, upright woman of 50, who had kept a registry office for 18 years, and had placed half the county's governesses, readers, sick nurses, and dinner company, and she said the word company the way other people said the word coal. "Now attend to me, because you are young enough to be foolish and old enough to know better. You are not hired to be liked. You are not hired to be interesting. You are hired to be there. A gentleman who sends to a registry office for a person to sit beside him at his own table is a gentleman with a hole in his household, and it is not your business to look into the hole. What is he like?" "He is a duke," said Mistress Prideaux, "which is a temperament as well as a rank. Wear the grey." And Susanna, "When you are asked what you are, say that you are companion to a lady in the town." "There is no lady in the town." "There is always a lady in the town." "I keep sugar," Susanna said. "My father kept the shop in the market-place, under the sign of the pineapple, and I was at his coppers from 11 years old, and when he died, the coppers were sold to a man from Bristol for £4.10, because a woman cannot be admitted to the company, and could not have raised the credit if she had been. I am not ashamed of a single hour of it. I will not be introduced as anything but what I am." Mistress Prideaux looked at her for a while over the top of a pair of steel spectacles. "Then you will be hungry," she said, "and I will still have my guinea, and she wrote the engagement in the book in a clear, round hand. The chaise came for her at 4 in the morning, and went out of the town by the north road while it was still full dark. It was the driest September the county had known in 20 years. The stubble fields had been burned, and the smell of them was in everything, in the hedges and the horse-cloth and her own hair, and the dust lay in the lanes like grey flour and rose in a low ghost behind the wheels. There had been no rain since the middle of August. The little river under the third bridge had gone down to a green thread, and the cattle stood in it with their heads down, and did not bother to move for the noise of the horses. She came to Harkstone before the light did, and saw the house first as a long absence of stars. The steward met her at the door with a lantern in his hand, and a face made ready hours before. "Mr. Latimer," he said, "you are the person from the town." "Susanna Cardew." "You are expected in the little parlour." He lifted the lantern and looked her over exactly once, and put the lantern down again. "You will find, I dare say, that you have nothing to do until 4 o'clock. He was wrong about that, but not for another hour, and by then she was inside the house, and she did not leave it again that day. The hall at Harkstone was 90 feet long, and the ceiling was so high that the light of a lantern died before it got to the top of it. 211 tenants held land of that house. Every one of them would sit down in that room at 4 in the afternoon, at 3 long tables of scoured oak, and the boards had been carried in the day before, and the trestles set, and the whole of it stood there in the dark, waiting like something at the bottom of a well. Latimer walked her the length of it, because the little parlour lay beyond, and halfway along she stopped. Between the 2 great windows on the courtyard side stood a case of glass on a plinth of stone, about the height of a man, and inside it, greyed and cracked, and sagging in the middle like a beast asleep, was a temple made of sugar. It had been white once. There were the columns of it, 8 of them, made of gum paste, rolled and cut and dried, and set with a paste of egg and sugar. There was the dome, and the little steps, and 100 hours of a man's eyesight in the carving of the frieze, and along the whole of the south face, where the light had got at it, the sugar had gone the colour of weak tea. A wasp lay dead on the plinth, with its legs drawn up under it. "That is not to be touched," Latimer said. "Who made it?" "Mr. Garrow made it. 6 years ago this day. It is not to be touched. It is not to be dusted. And the case is not to be opened. And I would take it as a kindness if you did not mention it to His Grace." "Why is it under glass?" "Because it was never broken," said Latimer. "And a thing that is never broken has to be put somewhere." And he took up his lantern and walked on, and did not answer any of the 4 questions she thought of asking after that. In the little parlour, when the terms had been said, and the 2 guineas had been set down, and her condition had been laid on the table beside them, the Duke of Harkstone at last unlocked his jaw. "Very well," he said. "Very well. Which?" "You will be introduced as what you are. What is it precisely, so that I have it right in front of 200 men?" "A confectioner." "There is a shop." "There is not a shop. There was a shop until the March before last, and now there is a milliner in it, and my father is buried at the top end of the churchyard, where the ground is dry, which pleased him because he could never abide damp anywhere near sugar. She said it evenly. She had had 18 months to get the sentence smooth. Your Grace, may I ask what the day is? Not the money. The day. He went and stood at the window with his back to her, and outside, over the stable roof, the sky had begun to go the colour of a peach skin. Michaelmas, he said, the rents are paid at the audit table in the estate office, which takes 4 hours, and which any clerk could do. The dinner afterwards is the thing. My grandfather gave it, and my father gave it, and I gave it twice, and then I did not give it for 5 years, and the county said what the county says. It is being given today. 211 men will sit down in that hall at 4 o'clock, and I shall sit at the head of them. And I have been awake since the day before yesterday, because I do not believe I can. And if I am there, you can? I do not know, he said. But if there is a person beside me who is under contract, then I cannot get up and go out, because a man may fail his tenants and think of a reason by morning, and he cannot walk away from a woman he has paid to sit next to. It is a low sort of arrangement. I am aware of it. It is not low, Susanna said. It is only cheap. You could have got the same effect by asking a friend, and it would have cost you nothing but the asking. He turned round then and looked at her properly for the first time, and something in his face moved and shut again. Breakfast is at 8, he said. You have 4 hours to yourself. She had never in her life had 4 hours to herself, and she did not want them now. So she went down. She found the kitchens by the smell, the way she had found every kitchen she had ever been in. And the smell told her the trouble before anyone did, because under the beef and the wood smoke and the hot fat, there was a thin, dark thread of burnt sugar. And burnt sugar in a house at 6:30 in the morning means a pan has been left and left again by somebody who could not stand over it. The confectionery lay off the north side of the passage, which is where a confectionery ought to lie. And it was a good room, and had been a great one. There was a slab of white marble, 8 feet long, set on brick piers, and a charcoal stove with 4 holes, and the coppers hanging by size on the wall, and a nest of pewter moulds in the shape of shells and fishes and a hedgehog. On the shelf stood 11 sugar loaves in their blue papers, with the nippers beside them, and jars of gum dragon, and orange flower water, and cochineal in a stoppered bottle with a crust round the neck. At the slab, with his hands in a bowl of paste, stood a very old man in a leather apron, and his hands were shaking so badly that the paste came out of the bowl in threads and fell back into it. "That's spoiled," Susanna said. "I know what it is," the old man said, without turning round. "You have worked it too wet, and it has been standing besides. I know what it is, girl. It wants a great deal more sugar sifted into it through lawn, and even then it wants 3 days in a hot closet, and there are not 3 days. There is one." She came and stood at the end of the slab, where he could see her without moving his head, because she had learned that trick from a man who had gone blind by degrees. "Mr. Garrow, is it?" He turned round then. He was 72, and his face was the face of a man being polite to a great deal of pain. "Reuben Garrow," he said. "And you are the woman from the town he sent for. They've been talking of nothing else since Tuesday." "Susanna Cardew." "Cardew?" His eyes came up. "Under the pineapple?" "You knew the shop. I knew your father. He came out here in the old Duke's time to see the moulds, and he stood where you were standing and told me my quince paste was a disgrace to the county." Garrow's mouth went crooked. He was right. It was a wet year, and I had not the patience to dry it, and I had let it stand in the sun, and it was as much use as a wet glove. He said that to a man in his own room. "He said it, and then he mended it," Garrow said. "He stopped the night, and we did it again together, and he never told a soul. 16 years ago, that. Sit down. I can't be looking up at people." Susanna sat on the corner of the marble and said nothing for a moment, and let the room be, and looked at the shaking hands going in and out of the ruined paste, as though they were still doing work. "How long?" she said. 3 year, coming on. It began in the right one, and I thought I would manage with the left, and then it got the left." He shrugged, a small, ugly movement. "I can still taste, and I can still see, and I can hear a pan. It's only that nothing does what it's told." "And the peace for today?" "Will not be," said Garrow. "There'll be no peace this year, either." Farther along the passage, there was a still room, and in it, that morning, a woman of about 38, named Effie, was standing over a basin, with her left sleeve pushed up, and her right hand going nowhere near the arm, because she had caught the inside of her wrist on the lip of a copper the night before, and had been keeping it out of everybody's way ever since. Susanna came in for cream of tartar and found her like that. That wants dressing. It wants nothing. It wants the day over. It wants dressing, and it will be worse by 4, and you are carrying jellies at 4. Susanna put the jar down. Cold water first, and a good while of it, not a splash. Then goose grease and a rag, and the rag not tight, and do not touch the blister, whatever your mother told you. Effie looked at her the way a person looks at a stranger who has said one true thing. "They said you was hired to sit down?" "I am." "Then why are you in my still room telling me about my own arm?" "Because I am early," Susanna said, "and idleness makes me hard to live with." And she filled the basin and stood there for the 11 minutes it takes, holding the woman's arm in the cold water with her own sleeve going dark to the elbow, and neither of them said anything more except once, when Effie drew her breath in, and Susanna said, "I know. Keep it under." The Duke of Harkstone, coming down the passage to say that breakfast had been put back, stopped short of the doorway and did not go in. He stood there for as long as it takes to count to 40. Nobody in that house had seen her arrive, except in the character of a person who had been bought for the day. And the woman in the still room could do nothing whatever for her, and pay her nothing, and say nothing of any use about her afterwards. He went back along the passage and stood at the window at the end of it with his hands behind him. What he felt was not admiration. It was more like being shown a door in a wall he had walked past all his life. At 8 o'clock, he came into the confectionery instead of into the breakfast room, because Latimer had told him where she was, and had said it in the voice of a man reporting a leak. Garrow did not stop what he was doing, which by then was nothing. "Well," the old man said, "you'll want to see it. I want to know that it is in hand." "It is not in hand." Garrow lifted both his hands off the slab and held them out in the air between them, and they went on trembling there in front of the Duke of Harkstone, like two things caught in a current. "That's what's in hand. That is the whole of what is in hand, your grace, and I have written you 3 letters about it since Lady Day, and you have answered 2 of them with money, which is not what I asked for. Garrow, there's no temple, there's no peace. The paste is dead and I killed it. You may put that in the case as well when I'm gone. The room was very quiet. Susanna stood at the end of the marble with a sugar loaf in her arms, and understood that she should leave, and did not, because there was no way out that did not go past the 2 of them. You'll come down this time, then, Garrow said. I shall come down. You said that 6 years ago. You said it to me in this room at 9 in the morning, with your hand on that stove. The old man's voice did not rise. 200 men in that hall from 4 o'clock. They waited 2 hours. Your father's chair at the head, and nobody in it, and Mr. Latimer white as a dish, and me stood by my piece, with a cloth over my arm, like a fool at a fair. And then word come down, you was unwell. I was not unwell. I know what you was. Garrow sat down slowly on the stool, because his legs had begun to go. They ate their dinner under an empty chair, and they went home, and old Bowden went home with his lease not asked for, because a man asks at that table and nowhere else. That's the custom. That's the whole of what the day is for. It fell in at Lady Day, and your agent let it fall in, and Bowden come off 90 acres his grandfather held. He's in the town now with his daughter. He'll be sat at the second table today, because he'd not miss it, and you may look at him over the beef. Yes, said the Duke of Harkstone. That was all he said. He did not explain, and he did not say that he had been 3 months in the ground of his own house, with his father's dying still in his ears. And he did not say that the agent had acted within his instructions. And he did not say that he had written to Bowden twice and been answered civilly, which was worse than not being answered at all. He stood there and took it, and the sugar loaf in Susanna's arms grew very heavy. I am going to ask a great impertinence, she said. Both men looked at her. There is one day. In one day a gum paste piece is impossible, and anybody who tells you otherwise has never dried paste. But boiled sugar is not impossible. Boiled sugar is a thing you do in the last hour before it is wanted, which is exactly what a hot, dry day is good for. She set the loaf down. Mr. Garrow, is there bay salt in this house, and a freezing pot? 2 pots and a pail. Ice? There's the ice house, said Garrow, though nobody has been down it since June. Then, Your Grace, I would like your leave to spend the money you have already given me. I shall want the 2 little coppers, and the loaves, and whatever the still room has of dried cherries, and quince, and ratafias, and Mr. Garrow beside me the whole way, because I do not know this stove, and he does. You are engaged as company, the Duke said. I am engaged until midnight, said Susanna, and you did not say what for, and I have never yet been able to stand in a room with a dead pan in it. He looked at the ruined paste, and at Garrow's hands, and last of all at her. Do it, he said. She began by clarifying, because everything begins by clarifying, and because it is the part people skip. She broke 2 loaves with the nippers into a copper, and put water on them to cover, and beat the white of an egg to a froth in a bowl with a little water, and stirred it in cold, and set the whole on the stove, and would not let it be stirred once it warmed. The scum came up grey and ugly with the egg holding all the dirt of the loaf in it. And she skimmed and skimmed with the perforated skimmer, and threw in a cup of cold water to raise it again, and skimmed after that, and did not stop until what stood in the copper was as clear as spring water, and the skimmer came up clean. "That's the whole of it," Garrow said from his stool. "Half the trade is skimming, and the other half is not turning your back." "My father said that." "Everybody's father said that." Then she took it on, and here she began to talk aloud without knowing she was doing it, which is a habit of people taught by one person in one room. Smooth first, when it will just draw between wet finger and thumb and part. Then pearl, when the thread will hold and stretch a little way before it breaks. Then blow, when you dip the skimmer and blow through the holes and the sugar goes off the other side in bubbles. Then feather, when the bubbles fly away in flakes. Then ball, and then, at the last, crack, when a drop let fall into cold water sets hard and snaps against the side of the basin like glass, and does not stick to the teeth. "Where do you want it?" Garrow asked. "A good crack, and just short of caramel, and I want it in the pan at 7 o'clock at night, and not before, because a spun sugar made at noon in this weather will be a wet rag by dinner. You'll want the sides of that pan kept clean, or you'll grain the lot." "Wet brush," she said. "Round the inside, every so often, and no spoon in it, and no crumb in it, and nothing dropped in it." And she said it to the room without thinking, and the room heard it, and the Duke of Harkstone, who had come to the door twice in an hour, and had gone away again both times, heard it too. At 9 there was a plate on the window ledge, with a cloth over it against the wasps. Bread, cold beef, a little salt in a paper twist, and a mug of small beer. Nobody said whose it was. She had told one person in that house that she had come away without her breakfast, and she had told him at 6 in the morning, in another room, in the middle of a sentence about something else. He came back at 9:30 with a reason, and stayed without one. "Latimer wishes to know whether you eat fish," he said. "I do." That was the whole of the inquiry. "Then you have discharged it." She was cutting quince paste into diamonds with a knife dipped in hot water, and did not look up, and after a moment he came and stood at the corner of the slab, where he was not in the light. "What is that?" "Quince. It was made in October last year by Mr. Garrow, and it is better now than it was then, which is the one mercy of quince." "How do you know he made it?" "Because it is cut too thick and set too firm, and he had the shakes coming even then, and because there is a great deal of him in this room." She turned a diamond over. "Your Grace, why did you not send to Bath for a confectioner 3 weeks ago?" "Because Garrow told me it was in hand." "And you believed a man of 72 with the palsy when he told you a thing that would have cost him everything to say otherwise?" "I believed him," the Duke said, "because I wanted to." He put the tips of 2 fingers on the marble. "That is the whole of my character, if you would like it early and get it over with. I am not proud. Everybody in this county has agreed that I am proud, and it is a great convenience to me, because the other word for it is a good deal worse." "What is the other word for it?" He did not answer, and she let it alone, and cut the rest of the quince, and after a while he took up the wet brush without being asked, and went round the inside of the copper with it, high up where the crystals were beginning, and did it properly, and put it back in its water. Where did you learn that? In this room, he said. At 8 years old, on a stool, being kept out of the way of a dinner. Garrow used to give me the scrapings of the caramel on a slate. By 11, the confectionery had been made hot by the sun coming round to the south window, and the slab was warming, which is death to sugar work. So she rigged a sacking over the glass and wetted it and stood back, and Latimer arrived in the doorway with his hands together. That window, he said, has a shutter? The shutter is nailed. It has a shutter, Miss Cardew, and there is a proper way of managing this room, and there is a person whose room it is, and there is, besides the small matter, that I have 211 men coming, and a hired lady from a registry office standing in my confectionery, with her sleeves pinned up like a laundress. That is 3 matters. Do not be clever with me. I have been 41 years in this house. He came in a step. Have you the least idea what will be said? Not of you, of him, that the Duke of Harkstone gave his Michaelmas dinner, and had no one to make his sweet but a woman he sent for by the day out of the town. They will say it whether the sweet is made or not, Susanna said, and if it is not made, they will say it and be right. Latimer stood there, with his mouth working and no words coming out of it, which is the condition of a great many good men on a bad morning. And then he said, The nails come out with a chisel. There is one in the 3rd drawer, and went away, and did not come back for 4 hours. They had the syrup for the ices standing and cooling by noon, and there was nothing to do with it until the ice came up. And so there was a half-hour in the middle of that day, with no work in it at all. The Duke of Harkstone came in with his coat off, which nobody in that house had seen since his father's funeral, and Susanna, without looking round, held out a spoon with something on the end of it. Name it. I beg your pardon? You had the scrapings of the caramel at 8 years old. Name it. He came and took the spoon with great suspicion, and tasted, and thought, and said, Burnt. It is not burnt. It is nowhere near burnt. It tastes burnt. That is a barley sugar, and it is the colour of a shilling. If you cannot tell that from burnt, we shall get nowhere. She gave him another. Now. Burnt. Your Grace. It has a burnt quality, he said. There is something charred about the whole of your trade. I do not say it is not agreeable. That is orange flower water. It is church, he said with conviction. It is the inside of a church. It is a christening. Somebody has put a christening in a spoon. Garrow made a noise on his stool that had not been heard in that room for 3 years, and had to put his handkerchief over his face. He is not entirely wrong, the old man said, when he could. It is what they sent gloves with. There, said the Duke, the stool supports me. The stool is 72 and biddable. She gave him a 3rd. Last one. He tasted it and stopped, and his face did a thing it had not done all day, and he said, Pear? It is pear. It is the yellow sort, the little hard ones off the wall in the 2nd court, that nobody eats. He looked at the spoon as though it had spoken to him. They are not good pears. They are excellent pears if you wait until the week they mean it, and stew them in a syrup with a blade of mace, which nobody in this house has ever done, because everybody in this house has decided about that tree. She took the spoon back. You may have one more if you can tell me the name of a ratafia. A ratafia is a biscuit. It is a cake. It is baked hard, and it snaps. It is a biscuit. It is beaten with sugar and white of egg, and it rises, and a thing that rises is a cake. Then a meringue is a cake. A meringue is a cake. A meringue, said the Duke of Harkstone, is a scandal, and I will hear nothing said in its favour. And Susanna Cardew laughed out loud in a way she had not done in 18 months, with her hand still holding the spoon, and did not put her hand over her mouth afterwards, and he stood there and let it go on, and did not say anything clever to bring it to an end. Effie came in at 12:30, with her wrist wrapped in clean linen, and stood inside the door with a tray of dried cherries. "Where do you want these?" "On the far end, out of the sun. I'll bring the quince too." She put them down and did not go. "It's Effie." "I know." "You didn't, though. When you was holding my arm in the basin, you didn't know it. You never asked." Effie put her hands in her apron. "There's a deal of them been in and out of this house. Nurses and readers and a French one once. They come and they get their money, and they never once ask a body's name, and they never once say a wrong thing neither. That's the way of it. They're smooth as a plate." She looked at the floor. "You told me not to touch the blister, and you told me it'd be worse by 4, and it is worse, and I'd have been no use with the jellies if I hadn't kept it under the water like you said. So there's cream of tartar in the second press, and hartshorn, and isinglass and rosewater, and there's my mother's little balance that weighs to a scruple, and nobody uses that room but me. And you may have any of it, any hour, and you needn't ask." Effie nodded once, hard. "Miss Cardew." "Susanna." "I'll not," said Effie. "Not today. Any road?" And she went, and the door swung a long time behind her. At 1 o'clock, a boy came up from the shrubbery to say that the ice-house door had been standing on the latch since June, and there was water in the bottom of it up to the 3rd course of brick. The Duke of Harkstone was on the ladder before anybody had finished explaining. He knew the ice-house. He had been let down into it in a basket at 5 years old, and had been ill afterwards from the cold and the delight. And he knew that the drain at the bottom of it ran out under the bank into a soakaway in the shrubbery. And he knew that a soakaway in the driest September in 20 years fills with leaf and dust and root and stops being a soakaway at all. They went down together because there was nobody else. Every hand in that house was in the hall or the kitchen with 4 hours to go, and Latimer would not spare a man, and there was no time to argue about it, and a thing either goes down a ladder itself or it does not get done. It was pitch dark under the dome, and the cold came up out of it like a hand. The straw at the top of the stack was black and wet through and stank. Below that, the ice had rotted from underneath, and what had been a solid blue mass in February was a lace of grey candles standing in a foot of water, and the water was the enemy, because ice in water is a bargain the ice always loses. "The drain first," she said. "Everything else is wasted until the drain. There is a rod in the passage. Then it will want 2 of us on it, 1 to turn and 1 to feed it, and neither of us can see." They found the mouth of the drain by touch, with the water round their boots, and he went in first with the rod, and she fed it to him arm over arm in the dark, and turned it when he said turn. And for a long time nothing at all happened. And then something gave with a sound like a bottle unstoppering, and the water began to go down past their ankles in a hurry. After that, it was 2 hours of the worst work either of them had ever done, and it was done in the dark, and nobody saw it. They broke out the rotten ice with a pick, and threw it up and out of the passage where it would do no harm. They found the sound core 2/3 down, blue and grainy, and ringing under the pick, and cut it clear of the wet. They carried up fresh straw from the barn in armfuls, and packed it in courses, and packed it again where it slumped. And the whole time the cold went into their hands, until their hands stopped reporting. She slipped once on the 3rd round of the ladder with a basket on her hip, and he put his shoulder under her without a word, and she braced her back against it and got her footing. And the two of them stood like that in the dark for 4 seconds, breathing, and neither of them said anything about it then or afterwards. At 3 o'clock, they came up into the light of the shrubbery, filthy to the elbow, with a basket of blue ice packed in straw between them, and sat down on the brick step of the passage because their legs had stopped being interested. "Your coat," she said. "My coat is a matter for tomorrow. There is straw in your hair, Your Grace, and in an hour you must sit at the head of that hall. There is straw in yours." He looked at the basket. "Is it enough?" "It is enough for the freezing pots, and that is all we need. You break it small with a mallet in a cloth, and you mix it with bay salt, 2 of ice to 1 of salt, and pack it round the pot in the pail. And the salt is the whole trick, because salt makes the ice hungrier for heat, and it takes the heat out of the cream through the pewter." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist and left a mark. "Then you turn the pot and scrape the sides down with a spaddle every little while, and turn it again. And if you do not scrape, you get a wall of ice on the inside and a warm soup in the middle, and everyone says the confectioner was lazy." "How long?" "3/4 of an hour, and somebody must stand over it the whole time and not go away." "Somebody must stand over everything in your trade," he said. "Yes," said Susanna, "that is rather the point of it. I hope where you are sitting tonight there is a window open somewhere near you, because there was not a breath of air in that county all that week, and the whole of the story from here on smells of burnt stubble and hot sugar. Stay with me a while yet. The worst of that day is over, and the best of it has not begun." At 3:30, the hall began to fill, and Susanna stood in the passage doorway in the grey gown, with her hair repinned and her hands raw, and looked down the length of it at the glass case between the windows. The Duke of Harkstone came and stood beside her, brushed and buttoned, and a different man on the outside. "You are looking at the case." "I have been looking at it since 6 this morning. Everyone who comes into this hall looks at it and then looks away, and by 4 o'clock 211 men will have done it. It was the last thing he made whole." "It was not," she said. "There is quince paste in that room from last October, and it is better than the temple ever was, and it will be eaten tonight by men who will never think about it once. That is not a smaller thing." He was quiet a moment. "It ought to have been broken. That is the custom. It is carried in, and the man at the head of the table breaks the first piece off with his hand and eats it, and then it goes down the hall, and every man has a piece of it before he goes home, and there is not supposed to be any of it left by morning. And instead, there is a wasp on the plinth. Instead, there is a wasp on the plinth, said the Duke of Harkstone, and a great deal of glass, and a house that has not given a dinner in 5 years. And neither of them said anything else about it, and they stood there together, looking at a ruined sugar temple in the ordinary way that two people look at a thing when there is nothing to be done about it, until Latimer came the length of the hall to say that the chaise from the town had come up the drive. Latimer got as far as saying it, and then did not go away, and stood turning his keys over. "The nails came out clean," he said. "They did. I have had the shutter oiled, and the pin put on it, so it will fold back in the summer, and I ought to have had that seen to in '89. He looked at a point above her head. "I said a thing to you this morning about laundresses. My mother was a laundress. There is not a great deal to be said for me when I am frightened, Miss Cardew, and I have been frightened since Tuesday. So has everybody in this house." "Yes," said Latimer with feeling, "and I am the one that has to count the forks." And he went off down the hall to count them. Mistress Prideaux came into the confectionery at 10 minutes to 4 with her bonnet still on. "Well," she said, "look at your hands. Good afternoon. Look at your hands, Susanna. Look at your sleeves. You have been in a cellar. There is straw on the hem of a gown I chose myself." She set her reticule on the marble, which is a thing you never do on a confectioner's marble, and Susanna moved it. "I drove out to see my woman, settled at a ducal table, and I find her in an apron. The work wanted doing. The work always wants doing. That is what work is for. It wants doing by the people it belongs to." Mistress Prideaux drew off her gloves, finger by finger. "Now, I'm going to say the thing plainly, because I have said it 11 times in 18 years, and 9 of those women are still in my book, and 2 are not, and I do not enjoy either some. You have had a day. It has been an unusual day. There has been a cellar and a crisis, and a great man in his shirt sleeves being agreeable to you, and you have been useful to him, and being useful is the strongest drink there is for a woman with nothing. I know what today is. You do not, or you would not have that color in your face." The older woman's voice did not rise. It went level and kind, which was worse. "At midnight, the chaise takes you back to the town, and on Friday, you go to a Mistress Hallowey's at Netherby, who is deaf, and wants the newspaper read to her at $1 a day. That is what today is. It is Friday's shilling. He has not been agreeable to me. He has been in a great deal of trouble, and I have been standing next to it. They are always in trouble. That is the whole of the article we sell." Mistress Prideaux took up her gloves again. "He wrote to my office. Do you understand what that means? A man may ask his neighbor, or his sister, or his mother's cousin, and it costs him nothing but a civil letter. He wrote to a registry office in a market town, and paid 2 guineas, rather than ask one living soul who knows him. And a man who will not be seen wanting by anyone he knows will not be seen wanting by you either. Not tomorrow, not on Saturday, not ever. Whatever passed in that cellar, he will remember it as a thing that happened during an engagement he paid for. Susanna stood with her hand flat on the cold marble. "You have gone white," said Mistress Prideaux. "I have been up since 3. Do not be proud with me of all people. I have been where you are standing, and I married a man who died owing £400, and I have kept myself since, by knowing to a farthing what I am and what I am for. And it is not a happy way to live, but it is a way." She put her bonnet straight in the dark of the window glass. "Sit at his right hand. Talk to him. Earn the money. And at midnight get into the chaise the first time you are asked, because the second asking never comes, and the waiting for it is what ruins them." She went out. Her step went away down the passage, unhurried. A woman with 18 years of being right behind her, and Susanna stood in the confectionery with 211 men coming up the drive, and could not, for a while, remember what she had been doing. At 3:30, before any of that, in the flat gold light, she had gone out for air into the dry garden behind the ice house, and it is worth saying what she found there, because it was in her mind afterwards through everything. Nothing in it had been watered since July. The box hedge had gone the colour of a fox. The pond in the middle was down to a ring of cracked grey mud, with the print of a heron in it, and one carp turning in what was left. And the whole place was loud with wasps in the fallen pears, and the smell was of rot and hot dust and sweetness, which is the smell of the end of a good year. She sat down on the edge of the dry pond with her raw hands in her lap. It went through her plainly, without any drama, in the way that true things arrive. He was not falling in love with her. He was a man with one dreadful afternoon in front of him, who had reached out in the dark and taken hold of the first steady thing. And the steadiness was hers, and he had paid 2 guineas for it at 6 o'clock that morning, like a man buying a rope. What she had taken for tenderness in the confectionery was relief. What she had taken for looking was a man checking that his arrangement was still in the room. He had been kind, and his kindness was a debt being paid, because she had made his dinner possible, and he knew it. And there is nothing on earth more like love from the outside than a proud man being grateful. And under all of it, plainer still, he needed somebody useful, and she had been very useful indeed. That was the whole of it. She could hear her father saying that a confectioner is a person nobody thinks about until the sweet comes in. A wasp came and sat on her wrist where the sugar had dried, and she watched it and did not move her hand. She thought about the rest of it too, since she was being honest, and there was no one to see. She thought about the 4 seconds on the ladder with her back against his shoulder in the dark, and the way he had said pear, and the plate on the window ledge with the cloth over it, and the fact that she had told exactly one person in that house that she had not eaten, and she made herself take each of those things and set it down, the way you set down a hot pan deliberately in the place it belongs. She did not cry, because she had done her crying in March of the year before, over a man from Bristol carrying her father's coppers out to a cart. And after that particular afternoon, a person's supply is not what it was. She sat in the dry garden for 6 or 7 minutes, with the wasps going over and the light coming level across the mud. Then she stood up and shook out her skirt, and looked at the sun to see how much of the day was left, and went in to see to the freezing pots, because the cream would not stand, and somebody had to be over it. The dinner began at 4, and it was a good dinner. There was beef, and there was mutton, and there was a pike from the stew ponds, and the noise in the hall by 5 was the noise of 211 men who had come expecting to be uncomfortable, and were not. The Duke of Harkstone sat at the head with his back to the empty fireplace, and did not get up, and did not go out, and answered when he was spoken to. And once, when a man 3 places down asked him about the drought and the wells, he talked for 4 straight minutes without stopping, and the whole of the top table listened with the particular attention of people who have not heard a man's opinion in years. Susanna sat at his right hand as she had contracted to do. Old Bowden was at the second table, a great slow ruin of a man with white hair over his collar, and when she went down the hall at 6 to see about the ices, he put out his hand and stopped her. "You're the one that's been in the confectionery." "I am." "There's straw in the back of your hair," said Bowden. "And I know that straw. That's ice-house straw. We packed it in February." And he took the better of the 2 chairs by him, and turned it round for her, and stood there holding it, an old man on his feet in a crowded hall, until she sat in it. And then he said, "Now," with enormous satisfaction, and sat down himself. At 7, the county came in for the dessert. That is to say, the neighbouring gentry came, as they always had at Harkstone, to stand at the top end and look on at the tenants' dinner for half an hour. And there were perhaps 30 of them, and they arrived in silk with their gloves on. A lady at the Duke's elbow looked down the table and said pleasantly, "And who is this?" Mistress Prideaux was standing behind the chairs by then, where a person from a registry office stands. She had had 4 hours to be looked at, and to be not quite spoken to, and something in her had turned. "Miss Cardew is engaged for the day," she said clearly. "From my office in the town. His Grace wrote for company on the 29th, and I supplied it. We do a great deal of this at the larger houses. It is quite the usual thing at a Michaelmas." It was said in a voice pitched exactly right for 30 people to hear, without anybody having to admit to listening, and it went along the top of that hall like water finding a crack. Susanna heard the pause that followed, and knew what was in it. She sat quite still, and let it pass over her, and then she said, "Yes, I was engaged this morning at 6. I am a confectioner," and picked up her glass, and the lady in silk laughed the little laugh that is not laughter, and turned to the man on her other side, and the top of the hall went on with its evening, and the shape of what she was had been settled in the county's mind in 11 seconds, and would take a great deal more than that to unsettle. At 7:30, Effie came in fast along the wall and got to Susanna's chair. "Miss Cardew, the pan." The pan had been carried across from the confectionery at 7 and stood by the hall fire to keep its heat, because a boiled sugar goes stiff the moment it stops moving, and it had stood there 25 minutes in the heat and the breath of 200 men. Susanna went down the hall with Effie and looked into the copper, and the whole of the top of it was cloudy. Round the edge, where the pan had cooled first, a white crust had come up like frost on a puddle, and when she put the skimmer in and lifted it, what came out was not a clear thread, but a soft grey grit that fell back into itself. It had grained. It had gone back to sugar, and 211 men were leaning round in their chairs to see the piece come in. "It's ruined," said Effie. "It is not ruined. It is grained, which is a different thing, and takes 10 minutes. Susanna was already stripping her sleeves back. "Effie, second press in your still room. The little blue paper, cream of tartar. Bring the whole of it and bring the small balance. And bring me a jug of water and the wet brush off the confectionery slab. Go. There's folk watching. Then go quickly." Somebody at the top table said something about the sweet, and somebody else laughed, and the sound of the hall changed the way it does. Susanna lifted the copper off the trivet by the 2 handles and set it on the hearthstone, and knelt down in front of the fire in the grey gown in front of 211 men. And Garrow came down the hall behind her with a hand on the backs of the chairs, 1 chair at a time. "Water," she said to him. "Half a pint to the pan and no more, or we are boiling till Sunday. You'll want tartar. I have sent for it. A scruple to the pound, and not a grain over, or it will never go to a crack at all, and we shall be pouring treacle over the county." She put the water in and set the pan back on the fire and let it all melt down again, every crystal of it, and would not let it be hurried. And while it went, she took the wet brush and washed round the inside of the copper, high up, over and over, taking down every grain of sugar off the metal, because 1 grain of sugar left on the side of a pan will come down into the syrup and start the whole business over. Effie came at a run with the blue paper and the little brass balance, and Susanna weighed the tartar to a scruple on the hearthstone, with the hall watching, and put it in. "Now it wants nothing but time, and nobody touching it," she said. "How long?" said the Duke of Harkstone. He had come down from the head of the table, and was standing over her with his hands at his sides. "A quarter of an hour. Your Grace, I am going to want 2 smooth rods held out level, about so far apart, and a cloth on the floor under them. And I am going to want them held perfectly steady by somebody who is not going to flinch when hot sugar comes past his knuckles. You will have them. They must be held out at arm's length for 4 or 5 minutes together." "Miss Cardew," said the Duke of Harkstone, "you will have them." And he took off his coat in his own hall in front of 211 of his tenants, and gave it to Latimer, who took it as if he had been handed the ark. Then it was the degrees, and the whole hall went quiet to watch, because there is nothing in the world so quiet as 200 men watching somebody do something they cannot do. "Smooth," she said, drawing it between wet finger and thumb. "Take it on," said Garrow on his stool at her shoulder. "Pearl, take it on." She dipped the skimmer and blew through the holes, and the sugar went off the far side in a shower of little bubbles, and Garrow said, "That's blow, and that's a proper blow. That's the first honest blow I've seen in this house in 3 year." And the men at the second table, who had no notion what a blow was, banged the boards with the flats of their hands. "Feather," said Susanna. "Is it?" said Garrow. "Let me look at it. Bring it round. That's a feather. Take it on, and mind it now. It'll run away from you from here." She let it go to the crack, and tried it in a cup of cold water, and the drop went hard as glass, and snapped against the side, and she pulled the copper off the fire, and stood it a moment in a basin of cold to check it, and said, "Rods." The Duke of Harkstone knelt on the cloth and held out the 2 rods at arm's length, and did not move them. She cut the ends of a whisk with the kitchen shears, and dipped it, and flung the sugar across the rods, backwards and forwards, and it came off the wires in 100 threads of gold finer than hair, and hung and swayed and set as it fell. And she did it again and again, and the light of the fire came through the whole of it, and in that hall on the driest Michaelmas in 20 years, there was a sound that nobody there had heard before, which was 211 men saying nothing whatever, all together. She gathered it up while it was still warm, and laid it over the mound she had built that afternoon on the great pewter dish, which was quince paste and ratafias and dried cherries and candied plums, 211 pieces of it counted out, and the spun sugar went over the whole like a cage of gold. And she carried the dish to the head of the table herself, and set it down, and stood back. "It wants breaking," she said. "It is not a thing to look at. It goes down the hall, and everybody has a piece, and there is none of it left by morning." The Duke of Harkstone put his hand into the gold and broke it, and ate the piece he had broken, and the dish went down the hall. It was while it was going, and the noise was at its height, that Mistress Prideaux got to her feet at the top end. "I placed her," she said. 2 or 3 heads turned. "I placed her here. It was my office. His Grace wrote to me on the 20th, and I sent out the only woman in my book who could have done it, because I know my book. I have kept it 18 years, and there is not a house in this county that has not had somebody through my hands." Her voice was quite steady at first. "There were 4 names I might have sent. I sent the one that would answer. That is a skill, whatever anybody supposes. It is a skill, and it is not a small one, and I would be obliged if somebody would say so, because I have sat behind these chairs all evening, and nobody has—" She stopped. Nobody had said anything. That was all. Nobody had contradicted her, and nobody had laughed, and nobody had asked her to sit down. The hall had simply gone on being a hall, with the dish going away down it, and a woman standing up in the middle of it, talking about a book. She stood there another moment with her hand on the back of the chair, and everyone could see her deciding whether to say more, and everyone could see her understanding, all at once, that there was nothing to say more of. Her hand on the chair back had begun to shake in a small way. She was 50 years old, and she had kept herself alive by knowing exactly what she was worth to a room, and the room had just told her. Susanna crossed the top of the hall and took her by the arm and put her into the chair. "You did place me," she said. "Nobody else would have. There is not another office in this county that had my name in it at all," and she said it plainly so that the people nearest heard it. And then she let go of the arm and turned away and said nothing more about it whatever. At 11:15, the hall was down to 20 men and a great deal of wreckage, and Susanna Cardew was in the confectionery washing the 2 coppers, because a copper left dirty overnight is a copper spoiled, and because her hands wanted something to do. Garrow sat on his stool with a mug he was not drinking. "You'll not do that," he said. "There's 4 girls in this house paid for that. They have been on their feet since 3 this morning. So have you." He watched her scour. "It went down the hall. Every man. I counted to 60 and give over. Old Bowden had 2, the thief. It was a good haul. It was a good piece. Garrow's voice went unsteady on the second word, and he covered it by drinking. Girl, that's a thing my hands can't do no more, and it'll not be done in this house again after me, and I'd have gone into the ground thinking so. It will be done. Somebody will do it. Not by Friday, it won't. Susanna set the copper upside down on the rack and stood a moment with her back to him, and her hands in the cooling water. On Friday, she said, I am to go to a Mistress Hallowes at Netherby and read her the newspaper at £1 a day, and I shall do it, and I shall do it well. It is all right, Mr. Garrow. Nothing I make is meant to keep. Not one thing in my whole trade is meant to keep, and it has never once made it worth less. She dried her hands. The chaise is at midnight. Will you tell his grace that I have gone to get my box, and that he was not obliged to come down and say anything, and that I said so? I'll not tell him any such nonsense. Then tell him what you like, she said. But I am going out by the courtyard door, because I would rather not walk the length of that hall. She walked the length of it anyway, because her box had been carried to the front, and at 10 minutes to midnight, the courtyard was full of lanterns and horses and men going home, and the county's carriages were coming round, and Mistress Prideaux was already up in the chaise with her hands in her lap. The Duke of Harkstone came out onto the steps with no hat and stopped her at the bottom of them, in front of all of it. Stop, please. There is a thing I did not say at dinner, and I have been 4 hours finding out how to say it, and I have not found out. He looked at the courtyard and made himself go on. This is Susanna Cardew. Her father kept the shop in the marketplace under the pineapple, and she was at his coppers from 11 years old. She is a confectioner. That is what she is, and it is what she told me at 6 this morning she would be called. And I let a woman say something else about her at my own table tonight, and I said nothing, and I have been ashamed of it since before it finished happening. Somebody's horse moved. Nobody spoke. I hired her because I could not come down to my own hall alone. That is the whole of it. Not proud. Frightened. 6 years frightened. His voice went, and he waited for it. The engagement is up at midnight. I have no right to a minute past it, and I am asking for it anyway. Do not get into that chaise. Susanna, I am asking you to stay. Old Bowden came up out of the dark by the horses and said, There's 90 acres once talking about, your grace, but not tonight, and put out his hand, and the Duke of Harkstone took it. And that was the end of Michaelmas at that house for that year, and the beginning of a good deal else. Latimer had the shutter in the confectionery folding on its pin by the following summer, and never once said so aloud. Effie kept her still room and her mother's balance, and gave neither up, and called her Susanna at last in the spring, on a Tuesday, over a bowl of gooseberries, as though it were nothing. Garrow lived 2 years more, and sat every day on his stool by the stove, and tasted everything, and told the truth about it, which was all anybody had ever wanted from him. And Mistress Prideaux kept her office and her book, and did not come out to Harkstone again, though she was asked twice, and she died at 61, still owed a guinea by a family in the north, and was buried respectably, which had been the whole of her ambition, and was not nothing. The case in the hall was opened in October, and what was inside it was carried out and broken up on the ash heap, because 6 years is a long time for anything to stand under glass, and the case itself went to hold a stuffed pike, and everybody agreed that was more like it. The 2 guineas lay on the marble slab in the confectionery for a long while under a fine dust of sugar. Nobody moved them, and at midnight, on the 29th of September, they were still lying there, and the clock in the courtyard was going. And the man who had put them down at 6 that morning, and named the exact hour the whole thing would end, stood in his own doorway, with no hat on, and could not name any hour at all. "You said a day," Susanna told him. "I did." "Nothing I make is meant to keep," she said. "I have never once minded that, but I should like to be asked again in the morning, when you are less tired, and by daylight, and then I shall answer you properly." And by the look on him, she might as well have answered him then. "Here is the thing that has stayed with me. If somebody loved a thing you made and put it under glass so that it could never be spoiled, would you thank them for it? Or would you want it broken and handed round and eaten while it was still good? Come and sit down with me again, and tell me what you decided."